16, 17 years of age. We became introduced to one another. I was in the Mount Pleasant Open Bible Church in a youth group. He was in the Pella Open Bible Church. Back then they had like district rallies and stuff, and we would cross paths. And got to know Bruce then. He was a year ahead of me in school. He went on to Bible college, same place that I would come a year later. And we are old buddies driving back and forth to UPS. We got on at UPS, working the docks there. That was the dream job when we were going to Bible college. By the way, if you got on UPS, you knew you were going to be okay.
Yep.
And I think Travis cost me like $1.65 when he was born. They had awesome insurance.
Yeah.
Probably for a bottle of pop I bought or something. But we both worked at UPS, and we had to leave at 10:30 because you were guaranteed 3 hours a night, 11 to 2.
Yeah.
And boy, if you got 15 minutes of overtime, you were in the gravy.
Yeah.
And I got to know Bruce. Bruce has served several different pastorates, very successful pastorates. He's been our regional director now for many years. He's not only my regional director, but he's my friend. I respect him. My board knows that I respect him. My board knows that I pay attention to what he says. I do what he says, even though sometimes I haven't wanted to do what he says. I submit to him. That's how much I respect him. And I know that he has a word for us tonight. So would you join me and give him a round of applause as he comes?
Thank you, man. Love you.
Yeah, I love you too.
Amen. I need somebody to pass out some. I've got a sheet for everybody. If you guys can just get one to everybody. Thank you, Will. Those are very kind words. You know, Will and I are getting to be the senior members in the region. And wow, at this last retreat last week, I was just reminded of a lot of years, a lot of relationships, a lot of friendships. And we're both kind of winding some things down. But Will called me a number of months ago, and I knew exactly what the Lord wanted me to share. And I've taken time to develop that. Did this go dead? Testing? It went dead. That's all right. So, I don't really need one, but I think you've got this one on, so it won't matter. All right. But here's what I'm going to do. I've got 4 times to speak. 3 of them, tomorrow morning, tomorrow night, Saturday, are all going to come out of 2 verses out of the book of Isaiah. And I just have 3 words for you out of each of those sessions. But tonight I've decided that, testing 1, 2, testing. Oh, there we go, testing. Whoa, now it's on. Woo. Tonight I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to share from the Word. I know that's important to your pastor. And Will, thanks for being a great friend. I remember we both pastored in Des Moines, Iowa at the same time, graduated from Bible school. I went away to South Dakota, came back. We both found ourselves in Des Moines, Iowa. And then not long after that, Will headed north, and then Robin and I got married, and we went to Boone, Iowa. And we robbed your youth pastor from you. Have you forgiven me? Oh, good. And then we went to Rockford, Illinois, and we've just had a great time in ministry. I've got to get used to this clicker in my hand. Great quotes on the real man. We got to figure out how we become real men while we're here. And I liked Will opening this up, but I want to say to you tonight, some of you in some of the sessions are going to probably respond to prayer or say, yeah, that's me. I need to act on that. And then some of you can be people that support and pray with. That would be really helpful. But a real man chooses to honor, love, respect, adore, and be faithful to one woman. Here's another one. Real men stay faithful. They don't have time to look for other women because they're too busy looking for new ways to love their own. I like that one. Real men serve Jesus. How about it, guys? Do you believe it? And It takes a real man to realize that he made a mistake, but an even better one to try to make things right. How many of you have made mistakes? I've made my share. And I'm thankful for forgiveness. You know, one of the greatest, it was one of the hardest things for me as a dad was to have to call a family meeting so I could apologize. But my kids learned about the reality of mistakes and failure and the importance of saying you're sorry and will you forgive me. Then real men pray. I believe in prayer. And I've been praying for you and I've been praying about this time together. What can make us a real man? If you got your Bible tonight, we're going to be in Genesis 37. I'm going to do something a bit different tonight, but I heard the Lord, and I want to, Will and I, one thing that we're a lot alike, we have a lot of differences, by the way. He's a hunter. I hunted for a couple of years in Bible school, and I no longer do that. Mark said that I get to be the first one at the clay, whatever we're shooting at. I am blind in one eye, so just be aware of that. I'm kidding. I'm deaf in an ear, but not blind in an eye. But one thing that we're alike in, Will and I are both straight shooters. I mean, we just kind of tell it like it is. I'm not a guy to beat around the bush. And sometimes people don't know what to do with that because they'd rather hear it more soft. And I try to be kind. I try to be pastoral. But I just have to tell you like it is. And so tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to share two stories with you. I'm going to weave them together. And we're going to start with the story of Joseph out of Genesis 37. Just going to read a few verses there. And I want to share a couple of words with you about this. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he had made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said to them, listen to this dream I had. And he tells them these dreams that he has. And these brothers are really ticked. Go down to verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to them, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, in verse 15, it says, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Well, they had moved on a bit from there, but the brothers discover him and they plot to kill him. So there's a lot of things in this story that set up this challenge. And I want to talk to you tonight just a little bit about Joseph's life. And this really is a close call with tragedy. Joseph was a teenager at this time. And some things about Joseph we know. Jacob was his father. And really there were 4 wives in the house. He had first married Leah, then he married Rachel, but they each had a maidservant, and he had kids with them. So, I mean, that's a complicated life, guys. I mean, some of you may sit there and say, wow, what a problem to have. Remember the word problem. I mean, you brew jealousy in a house like that, having 4 wives and lots of children with those wives. And Jacob loves Joseph more than all the others. So he favors Joseph and gives him this wonderful looking coat. And so he goes out to the field. He's doing what his dad tells him to do. By the way, that robe that he was given was a robe that a working man would not wear. So another problem is Joseph's brothers realize we get to do all the work, and this guy gets to lounge around. And so it creates a lot of jealousy. They want to get rid of him. And so they were going to kill him, and the oldest brother, Reuben, says, no, I think we ought to just put him in a hole. And then they decide, they see some people coming along the road, and they decide to sell him into slavery. And now, that's a tragic story if you put yourself in Joseph's shoes. You're 17 years old, and you've got a lot of life to look forward to. You're loved by your dad, and you think you may never see your dad again. Okay? And so that's a great challenge. And Joseph, he does a lot of great things, but I just want to tell you this. These dreams that he had was an early gifting by God for his life. And he was able to interpret dreams, and he knew a lot about that. I'm going to weave my story into Joseph's, because Joseph is the guy in the Bible that I most identify with. And each of the points I'm going to tell you about Joseph is a point about my life as well. I had a close call with tragedy, and this was an unexpected fall in my life with an unexplained recovery. I grew up in a Christian home. Will told you I grew up in Pella, and my dad was actually from down around the Mount Pleasant area in Burlington. My dad went to the Burlington Open Bible Church. My mom went to the Pella Open Bible Church. Dad went to Bible college at Open Bible College, where we went to school. Dad hoped he'd hear a call to ministry, but he didn't, and so he returned to the family construction business that he was a part of. And so I grew up in a Christian home, knew nothing different, and there's a lot of blessings in that. But I will tell you, Christian homes aren't perfect. So some of you may sit here tonight and say, wow, wish I could have had your story. Well, hang on. My story isn't all easy either. But I was led to the Lord at the age of 5. Matter of fact, it was in the spring of 1967. I was 5 years of age, and our pastor's wife during children's church gave an invitation, and I knew I needed Jesus in my life. I knew I needed a Savior. I knew this God that I sang about in church and Mom and Dad talked about, I knew I wanted Him to be mine. And so I asked Christ to come into my life. About 6 months later, we lived on an acreage north of Pella, and it's a big old farmhouse. I actually just recorded a video there a couple of years ago, and I was very, very pleased. When I went back to that old farmhouse, it was much the same as it was when I was there in 1967. Matter of fact, the same lady that bought it from my parents still lived there. And so when I called her and said, this is a really strange request, but can we come and shoot a movie at your house? She said, well, tell me more. And I told her, and so we went and shot this movie. But I was in kindergarten. I was getting ready to go to class, get on the bus, and my two brothers, my older brother's 4 years older than me, my younger brother's 4 years younger, so my little brother was just a little squirt. But they were sitting on the top steps. My mom was down in the basement, just a rough basement with a cement floor. And I went to squeeze around them, and I had my stocking feet on, and I slipped, and I fell head first onto the concrete floor. And my mom, she's with the Lord now, but whenever I'd hear her tell the story, she'd say, I thought somebody just threw a coat down the stairs. And she looked and she saw me laying there. And my head on the right side of my skull was broken. The skull was completely fractured, very jagged points on the right side. My mom picked me up and blood shot out of my ear, and I was totally unconscious. And so my mom put all of us kids in the car. Dad was already at work, and he was building a house for my mother's parents, and us boys had been there helping Dad on that house. But Mom threw us in the car, and she headed to town to take me to the hospital. And my dad met us there, and I had a really weird experience. I was unconscious that whole time, don't remember anything of that. But as Dr. Canis, our family doctor, met us at the emergency room, I was looking down from above, and I could see every person. I knew my doctor, I knew his nurse, and I saw these other people surrounding my bed. And I thought, this is weird. And then I was gone again. And our doctor just said, you need to get him to Blank Memorial Hospital in Des Moines as fast as you can. So my dad drove real fast. And my mom and dad were in the front seat, and I was laying across their laps, and twice I stopped breathing, and my mom and dad just laid their hands on me and prayed, and twice my heart started beating again. And so it was a miracle, but they got me to Blank Memorial, and a team of doctors examined me and then put me in a room with two boys who could do nothing for themselves. And the doctor said to my mom and dad, you need to get used to this life. And my mom and dad were crushed. Our pastors met my mom and dad there, and for several days they just waited. I was totally unconscious for about 3 days. And I don't remember anything during that time, but I remember the moment. To this day, I remember the moment when I came to. I tipped my head up because I was laying flat, tipped my head up, and right at the foot of the bed was the nurse's station out my door, and that's where my parents were. And our pastors were standing there. And I spoke Mom and Dad's, I said, Dad, Mom, and they came running in the room. And doctors could not believe this. And I went home a couple days later on Thanksgiving Day, 1967. And all the doctors could say is this was a miracle. Now, obviously, our pastors and my parents, they were like, God has done a miracle. But here's what I could tell my parents when I came to. I don't remember seeing Jesus or hearing any words. I don't remember seeing any bright lights. I just remember being above that bed at the ER in Pella, seeing them working on me. That's the only thing I remember. But when I woke up, I knew this. God had called me to be a pastor. I was 5. So I can tell you this, for all the rest of my years, before Will and I ended up at Bible college together, all the rest of my years, I watched our pastors do everything. I saw some of them do good things. I saw some of them do things that no one understood. But I learned a lot by watching our pastors. And so this story is a close call with tragedy. And I want to talk to you about the lesson that comes out of this, and that is purpose. A lot of times when God takes us through tragedies, I'm sure that you all have stories of tragic things in your life, but I can tell you this, when you come through a tragedy, you can often begin to look back and see something clearer. And Joseph, after he went through this close call with tragedy, he knew that God had a purpose for his life, because you can see it weaved from Genesis 37 all the way through to Genesis 50. Matter of fact, I didn't count these chapters and compare them with others, but it is one of the longest accounts of any person in the Bible, Joseph's story. And so my experience with a close call tragedy was that I knew that I was called to be a pastor. That was never a question. No one ever had to convince me. No one ever, they had career days at high school, and everybody would go to see, and they'd talk about, what are you going to do? And I'd say, I'm going to be a pastor. And I just knew that. It was a settled matter from the age of 5. But this verse has been very helpful to me, even in hard times. And by the way, especially in hard times. And that's Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. Now, I want to tell you, I know this about my mom and dad's faith. If I had not had a miracle in that room, my mom and dad still would have counted on the goodness of God. Because my mom and dad went through hard things even after my accident, and they trusted God all of their years. In our family business, in our family times together, mom and dad loved God. They worshiped Him. They served Him until their last breath. And it's a great legacy that I'm very grateful to have in my life. But purpose is an outcome of tragic events. Second thing I want to talk to you about is, if I can get this, there it is, incident number 2, a lie that holds you captive. So I want us to look at Genesis 39, verses 1 through 7. Genesis 39, 1 through 7. So Joseph was sold into slavery, and he ends up really getting a fabulous job with an official named Potiphar. And Potiphar, he gives him the keys basically to his kingdom. And it says here, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household, of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Now I'm not going to compare myself with that, but there is something here I want to compare to. After a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in my house or in the house." And he has this back and forth conversation. We don't know how long it happened, but on numerous occasions, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph to go to bed with her. And he kept refusing. He kept holding his ground. And he held his ground on 2 positions. First of all, he said, "I could never do this to my boss. He has treated me so well that I could not do this with his wife for his sake." But secondly, he had a strong moral belief in his God. And he said, "I can't do this because of the God that I serve." And so one day, Potiphar's wife gets a hold of his coat, and Joseph resists, and he runs. And he runs out of the room, and his cloak is left in her hand, which, I know how they dressed back in those days. That means he basically runs out of the house naked. Not a very great position to be running out of a lady's house without clothes on. And she immediately accuses him of doing wrong to her. And Potiphar throws him in prison. And he's going to be in prison for at least 2 years. We know at about the 2-year mark something unusual happens. But that lie from Potiphar's wife held Joseph captive. And so he goes from being put in a pit and sold into slavery, brought down to Egypt, and given a huge advancement to Potiphar. And why? Because Potiphar said, everything Joseph touches turns to gold. This guy is a quality guy. This guy is like the best servant I've ever had. And so he's really wrapped up with him. But then, out of the false accusation of a wife, he ends up in jail. That's a tough turn in the story. So I'll flip to my story here, and tell you a couple of things that are a bit unusual. Growing up in the Pella Church, I grew up in a youth group. It was a great youth group. We had great services. I remember Sunday night services when God moved and really revival hit our church. And it was because of the teenagers. I mean, they were hungry for God. And I love that. Now that's a high point in our youth group. I want to introduce you to a low point. All the guy friends I had in our youth group slept with girls. But I had this vow I had made to the Lord, and actually I made two vows to the Lord as I hit my teen years. The first one was I was going to keep myself pure until I met my wife. And the second one was I wasn't going to touch a drop of alcohol. And listen, you may have a story that says, oh man, you put my life to shame. Listen, I had sin in my life that I needed the blood of Jesus just like every person in this room. But those were two promises that I made to the Lord. So it was really hard for me, especially in my high school years. A couple of my very close friends, I went to church camp with them every year. They would sleep with as many girls as they could. And the older we got in our teen years, they were like, you're not interested in what we do, so we're not hanging with you. So basically, the last couple of years of high school, I didn't have very many guy friends in our youth group. And now there were guys that kept coming to youth group, but they just didn't hang with me. And so my senior, my week of youth camp at Clear Lake, the year before my senior year of high school, I met a gal there that was from another Open Bible church. I won't tell you where, but Will knows my story so well. He actually rode along with me on my journey for several parts of this. But she said she was going to Open Bible College, and I thought, well, this is perfect, because none of the girls in my youth group were going to Open Bible College. And I thought, I'd like to have a wife that feels called to ministry. So we dated throughout our senior year, got engaged in my senior year, and 2 months after I graduated from high school, we walked down the aisle and were married. Now, all of that might seem pretty normal to you, and it was to me. I mean, I had no clue what was about to happen, but because all of our family and friends were gathered there for the wedding, and we get married, and so we do the reception thing, we go change, and we're getting in my car to go on our honeymoon. And the only thing I can tell you is there are two words that describe when I got in my car. I felt pure coldness, and I felt total darkness in that vehicle. And I was like, this is weird. I mean, this should be one of the happiest days of my life. I mean, I have waited for this day for, well, I can't say I waited 18 years for this day, because, you know, when you're a little boy, you don't have thoughts like that. But when you become a teenager, you have a lot of thoughts about your married life. Okay? But I felt this absolute coldness and darkness in the car. We drive about 5 hours to the hotel where we're going to be, and we get in the hotel, which was a bit awkward. I've never walked in a hotel room with a woman. And I get in the hotel room, and I hear these words. It's a promise that was kept. I will never consummate my vows with you. And I paused a minute, and I thought, consummate? I've never used that word. Is that word what I think? And I was reminded several times that night that that was my new reality. I laid in bed that night and the next night and the next night, and all I could think about was today, and then I said it the next night, yesterday, and then the next night, 2 days ago, I made a vow to God for better or worse. This is bad. This is like, I feel ripped off. And I don't know what to do. So we finished our honeymoon and we returned back to her parents' house. And then we went to my parents' house, and then our parents all helped us move to Open Bible College in Des Moines. And I am in a world that is spinning like crazy. And I'm just asking myself, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I mean, I don't know who to talk to about this. I mean, I was like very good friends with my mom and dad, but I was like, I would be embarrassed to talk to my mom or dad about this situation. And believe it or not, I went 7 years without ever telling one person about that. So all of the nights we rode to UPS together, and you came home to Joyce for a little lovin', I had nothing. I had nothing. It was rough. Went through 4 years of Bible college. Then I went to become the senior pastor at a church in South Dakota. And it was the loneliest place in my life. Now, I want to tell you what life was typically like, because Will would have never known that. Will and Joyce went to pastors' retreats with us, conferences. We were in services together. We had school functions together. In public, everything looked absolutely normal. She taught Sunday school, she sang, she prayed with people. But when you get in the car to leave church, you feel darkness and cold. And so we slept in separate beds most of the time in our married life. And there were times that she would even make me promises. But these were the lies. This was the lie she lived behind was, if you just take time off of ministry and we go on vacation, it's going to happen. I'd say, I'm off next week. Let's do it. And we get to a hotel and she'd say, you lay a hand on me, I'm calling the sheriff. And you'll be charged with rape. It was like everything good on Sunday, everything bad at home. And it was a very lonely place for me. And finally in year 7, I said to her, I'm going with you to your annual physical. I had a plan. I thought, I don't know who I could talk to, but I know our family doctor, and I'm going to talk to him about this. So we go in, and he says, oh, hi. You're along today. Yeah, I am. Doc, I need to tell you something. We've never consummated our vows. He had a surprised look. He said, I've seen your wife for 7 years. There's nothing abnormal. And so I was even more puzzled. So 3 more years come and go, and it was on our 10th anniversary. I was getting ready. I was pastoring in Des Moines, Iowa at the time, and we had Luis Palau. Some of you know Luis Palau, an evangelist. I think he's gone to be with the Lord, and in the last year or two. And I was going to be his counseling chairman for the crusade. And the first day of the crusade, she says these words to me, and she kept them. I'm going to be leaving you. And now I want to tell you this. A little bit of me was like, what took so long? Why'd you stay? I got nothing. I got nothing to say to that. It's just like, but I was like, you can't leave. And the reason why is because she was very sick physically. And she was very dependent on me for the last few years of our married life. So about a month later after that crusade, got through that, I was getting up on a Sunday morning, getting ready to go to church, and I was going to preach a new series on the 7 letters to the churches in Revelation. And here was the title to my first sermon: Losing Your First Love. And I got done with my shower in the basement. I came upstairs and she said to me, I'm not going to church today. Today's the day. Bring my suitcases up from the basement. I brought her suitcases up, but I went to church thinking she won't leave because she needs my health insurance and she's not in very good shape physically. So I think she'll be here when I get home from church, but I was sadly mistaken. I came home to an empty house. And I mean, almost everything was gone. And this is weird. It was the loneliest decade of my life. Because I'm pastoring 2 churches, love people, with people in public, but you go home to a home that you are totally alone. But when I walked in that house and almost everything was gone, I looked around and I said to myself, I really am alone. So what do you do with that? I felt really crummy about this because the first 2 calls I made the first one was to her parents. And the second was to my parents. Because I felt like, everybody in our family didn't have a clue. I mean, when we went to their house at Christmas, we slept in the same bed. And I'm sure that we had a few struggles because there was a season toward the end of our 10 years that she started telling people at church and telling both of our families, we're trying to have a baby. And I would hear this and I would think, how? How? We do eat watermelon. I have swallowed a few seeds, but I don't know how that's going to happen. But that was the lie she hid behind. She wanted to feel normal to her family and close friends. So anyway, the story isn't finished yet. By the way, here's a dime for you, Will. I know you need it. So she has moved out, and in my ignorance, I just am stuck to my vow. I made a vow to her, and her brother happened to be my associate pastor at the time, so he would many times challenge me and say, don't be an idiot. And I finally listened to him one day, but anyway, I just said, I would try to get her communications. I just say, come back home. And I said, you can come home even if our vows are never consummated. Because I was really concerned about her. That's a weird thing, isn't it? But I was concerned about her. And she came home after about a month, 5 weeks maybe being gone, and slept in separate beds when she came home. And about the second night, I'm sleeping in my room, and I hear her talking. And I go in her room, and this never happened in our married life, but I went in her room and I asked her a couple of questions because she was mentioning a guy's name. And I said, what's his last name? And she told me. And I said, where does he work? And she told me. And I said, how do you know him? And she told me. I've lived with him for the last 5 weeks. And I woke her up. He was an 18-year-old co-worker. I was 28. She was 28 at that time. And her co-worker was 18, and they were sleeping together, having sex. It blew my mind. And she called him on the phone. She said, you need to leave work and come pick me up because I'm leaving. And I was glad to let her out the door because I thought, I have waited for you and waited. and hid behind your lie for 10 years. And I was pretty done at that moment. Now, don't throw an egg at me. I changed my mind for a brief period because after she moved out, she got even sicker, and she called me and said, I have to go to the ER. And I said, I'll meet you there. No boyfriend. If I'm paying this bill, he ain't showing up at ER. And so about a week in the hospital, and she came back to our house and was there for about another month. And this is how the story kind of came to a rude end. I'm teaching at Wednesday night Bible study, and I'm just about ready to go up. Worship was just wrapping up, and I'm just about ready to go up, and her brother, who's my associate pastor, comes up to me from the back of the church, and he says, she called, and there's people trying to break in your house. Well, I lived about 3 blocks from the church, and so I quickly went to my car, and I drove quickly to our house, and I flew in the back door of our house, and I see this car pull into our drive, and out comes a guy with a long gun and a guy with a ball bat. And I didn't know what this 18-year-old boy looked like, so I didn't know that one of them was the 18-year-old boyfriend. And so I knew I had come in that back door and I hadn't locked it. And that's the door they headed to. So I opened up a window right beside that door. I felt the power of God come on me. I mean, look at my size, guys. Do I look real intimidating? I became intimidating. I can tell you this. Because I lifted that window right by the door where they're standing, ready to come in that door. And I spoke to them so sternly. I think I put the fear of God in them. They both ran back to their car and took off. Within 2 minutes, our block was blocked off with a dozen Des Moines police cars. Now, this was in January at about 7:30 at night, so it's dark. And I am totally embarrassed because all my neighbors know I'm the pastor. And all my neighbors up to that point liked me. And I thought, this is not a good witness. And the police came into our home, and I thought this was really odd, but I learned later why. I thought it was odd, but they put my wife in one room and were questioning her, and put me in another room and were questioning me, and I thought, this is really weird. And they were done questioning me, but they weren't done questioning her. Well, they knew some things about the story that I didn't know. And so I'm sitting on our porch, which was a closed-in porch, and I see these 2 dudes coming among the police cars, coming back to the house. So I called out to one of the officers. I said, there's the 2 guys that were here. And guns drawn. It's a pretty cool thing. But, I've never been in that much police activity in my life. And it really wasn't about me. And so they arrest these guys. They take them off to jail. And from one of the police officers, he came back and talked to me privately. And he says, this guy that we've just hauled off that had the long gun said that you're holding your wife against her will. And I said, no, I'm not holding my wife against her will. But that was the story she had been telling her 18-year-old boyfriend for the last month. And so it was only a matter of days that she left, and I got some good advice from people who loved me, and filed for an annulment. I had to wait 90 days. This is the hardest thing, guys, in my life that I've ever done. Walk into a courtroom, and the judge calls me and my attorney, who happened to be a lady, called us to stand and come up to the bench. And there's not another man in the courtroom. It's full of women. And the judge says, you're asking the court for an annulment. And we had to tell them why we were asking for the annulment. And I'm standing there feeling like, oh, I'd just love to have the floor open up and me just get sucked in it. Because all these ladies are looking at me like, really? And I'm looking at them like, really? And as soon as the judge dropped his gavel, I was out of that courtroom. I was so glad that it was done. And now I will tell you this. I'm not going to tell you the full story about how God brought me together with my wife, because Robin is really an answer to prayer. So I'm 29 years old, having been granted an annulment by the state of Iowa, which basically I had to say that there was never any sexual activity in our... I had to say that to the judge in front of all these women. And I tried to keep a low voice, but my voice cracked a time or two because it was an emotional thing. Okay? But the Lord had kept my wife. The promise I made to the Lord when I was 5, I'd be a pastor, a promise I made that I would keep myself for a future wife. And I had, all the way through 10 years of a marriage relationship that had nothing. And I'm not telling you all the parts of the story, but I'll just throw this in here. There were nights of pretty serious threats in our home. In the months she moved back home, then left, and then went to the hospital and then moved back home, when she would threaten me, if you sleep tonight, I'm coming in your bedroom and you'll never wake up again. And I had to literally go to our kitchen and take every knife out of the drawers in our kitchen, because I was like, I don't have any other weapons here, but she could cut my throat. So God kept Robin Flatten, who was a single gal from South Dakota. She was actually a year ahead of me in school at Open Bible College. And she was in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm pastoring in Des Moines. She's single, had never married, and I'm annulled. Now, what does that mean? I'm annulled and looking. And God brought us together so marvelously. And Robin's been the best thing in life outside of Jesus for me. So, a lie that holds you captive. I was held captive in a lie for 10 years. Okay? Let's talk about the lesson. The lesson is perseverance. I want to tell you this. I have been through some really tough things in ministry. Okay? And when Robin and I pastored in Boone and in Rockford, Illinois, we had a lot of great days. So please don't get me wrong, but we had some really big challenges we faced. But I want to tell you, in this role, it's been really crazy. As a matter of fact, there have been many times I've begged God, can I just go back to being a pastor? I have had some real train wrecks to deal with. But I will tell you this. Out of that 10 years in that being controlled by a lie, God worked perseverance in me. The waiting, the nights that never seem to end, the year after year. How do you celebrate an anniversary of somebody you've never consummated a relationship with? Like a candlelight dinner? Yeah, I tried to be creative, but it was hard. Okay? But, you have all of those challenges, and all the way through it, I was like, God, I don't know what you're up to. I do know you called me to be a pastor. I don't have a clue what you're up to in this. But I can tell you this. I knew when I came out the other side of that God had worked a resilience in me. I just won't give up. I just won't quit. I'm not giving in. And God did that wonderfully in me. And so Romans 5:3-4 is one of my favorite passages We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. I say the lesson learner here is perseverance. I can tell you why I'm not a quitter. I can tell you why I don't give up. It's because of a lesson out of a decade of my life that was very painful. And I've had a lot of guys, and if you want to talk to me alone while we're here, I'm pretty open about this thing, but I can tell you this. It was but by the grace of God. It was the hardest. Because I'm telling you, in your roaring 20s, when you got to idle back, and you got to keep idling back, and you got to keep yourself under guard, it's a tough road. Tough road. But I was a week before my 30th birthday when Robin and I got married on May 16, 1992. Oh, what a glorious day. And tell you this, worth the wait. Worth the wait. But that painful, hard decade built something in me. I tell you, a lot of people today in our world don't have a lot of perseverance, even though they're walking through trials. I'll tell you, you don't get perseverance just by walking through trials. You get it by going all the way through them, and especially through them with the Lord in your life. Third incident I want to talk to you about, and this one's short, so hang on. I'm just about done. I just wanted you to get to know me, and then tomorrow night you'll get to know why I'm going to give you the 3 words I'm going to give you. Genesis 41, this is an appointment that puts you second in command. Genesis 41, verses 41 through 44. So Joseph, he gets out of prison because he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and it says, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, he gets him out of jail after 2 years in jail, gets him out, and he says, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, make way. He got a big promotion. He goes from jail, but by interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, Pharaoh says, this guy is really the real deal. And he puts him in second in command to himself. Here's the part that's my story here. Rob and I pastored in Boone and Rockford. In our Rockford time, we were there. We had just a great decade of ministry there. It was probably the sweetest 10 years of ministry I've ever had. It was just honestly God. And it was a church I did not want. Ken Gruen called me on Valentine's Day in 1999. It was of the year 2000, because we ended up moving 3 months later. He called me on Valentine's Day 2000 and said, because Rob and I met with him after fall retreat the year before, and we said, hey, Ken, we feel like our time in Boone's about up. So we're praying. So he called me on Valentine's Day about 3 months later, and he says, how about Rockford, Illinois? I said, how about not? I knew the church. My aunt was a secretary there. All the pastors had been fired. All the board members had resigned. Who wants to go to Rockford? I said, we'll pray about it. And so then Rob and I felt like we would go there, and we went there to Rockford and met with the resigned elders, and half of them were moving out of state. So I began to ask this question, well, who's going to be here if we'd come? So they knew some others that were already leaving the church. But anyway, we came, and it was a hard first 18 months there, honestly. Had no board, had no workers, no volunteers. Nobody wanted to do anything because they were all sick and tired of church. But God began to do something in Rockford. And in our third year, we built a large addition on our sanctuary. And I general contracted that. My dad was a carpenter, and I was a carpenter's son. So I said, I think I can do that. Yeah, that was something. You only do that once, Will. And so anyway, God continued to bless. Church grew. We ended up relocating, changing the name of our church, and God did a wonderful thing. I mean, just we were in a new neighborhood on a 4-lane highway, and the growth was just phenomenal. Then Will and Joyce came to town. I don't know if you remember this, but you guys came to town to visit us, and you and I were both on the board with Ken Gruen, and you said this to me in our living room, and it scared me to death. You said, "You're going to replace Ken Gruen." And I said, "No, I'm not." Because I knew of guys that wanted to replace him. And I said, "They're going to be the ones." And so Ken announced to the board that he was going to be stepping down, and I was just like, okay. I was happy as a lark in Rockford, and one day Ken got in touch with me and said, "I've talked to Jeff Farmer, the president, and I believe you should replace me." And I was like, I know 3 board members that want your job, and I'm not one of them. And you weren't the other, okay? So we were both in the same boat on that. But anyway, needless to say, they appointed me to replace Ken Gruen, and then a year after becoming the regional executive director, I was asked to become the vice president of Open Bible. Now, I want to tell you, to be a vice president of Open Bible is really no big deal. You're just the man in waiting if the president has a heart attack and dies. There's no pay. There's no job description. There's just a little blip in the bylaw that says you're the vice president. And you know what? I'm actually good with that. And in 2018, Randall Bach, when I was going through my reappointment process, he sat down with me. He said, I'm getting older. And one of these days I'm going to step down. I want to know if you're going to be the guy that replaces me. And I said, Randall, just this year, Robin and I have heard from the Lord so clearly that we are in our final position. I'm not going to be the president of Open Bible. And I'm good with it. And so this year we just elected a new president, Michael Nortoon, and I am so thankful for him. But I will tell you, an appointment that puts you second in command, I would have never guessed at any point in my pastoral life that I would have that opportunity. I would have never guessed that because it wasn't something I craved or desired or worked for. I was purely happy serving a local church. And so, anyway, promotion. That's a little deal there, but I've got a little lesson for us on promotion. This word out of Genesis 50:20, it's the most popular verse about Joseph's story. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. I want to tell you this about positions. I don't want you to look at me as somebody with a position this weekend because I want to tell you this. People with positions put pants on the same way you do. People with positions have gas problems just like you do. People with positions have real life stories just like you do. And what Robin and I found out, we go to these conferences, and a few times we've had opportunities to meet some of our speakers and that, and we'd be like, man, on stage, they're just phenomenal. And behind the stage, they tell us some of their tragic stories. And we'd be like, wow. God can use all of us. He can use any of us. So 3 things tonight: purpose, perseverance, and promotion. Worship team, I think, was going to come back if you guys would come up. I want to give an opportunity for us just to pray for some people tonight. And some of you might respond to one of these words, and some of you might help me just pray for some that respond to these words. Some of you may be here and you may be at kind of the end of your life and saying, I've been through all my life and haven't really known the purpose that God has me here for. But I want to say this to you. Everybody has a purpose. God has a purpose for every man in this room. And you may say you've not discovered it yet, but I want you to know that God does have a plan for you. And I can tell you this, a man that came and responded at the end of one of my services in Boone, Iowa, he was a vice president of a insurance company in Des Moines, and his son was tragically killed in a train crash, and I had his funeral, and he came to a service a couple weeks after the funeral. And he was instantly delivered of alcoholism. He heard the message that morning, and God changed Phil's life. And he was near retirement. But he said, Bruce, today has changed my life. And you may be here tonight, and the word about purpose, you may be saying, God, that's what I need. Some of you may be here, and the word perseverance is a good word for you because you've been walking through a long trial. And I want to tell you this. Matter of fact, I've got a coach. He lives far away from here right now, but he said to me just a few weeks ago, because I'm in the middle of a big trial. And he said, Bruce, this season is an assignment from the Lord for you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not thrilled about that. This may be God's assignment for me, but I'm not excited about it. But I want to tell you this, I have embraced it. And I want to just say to you, don't give up. I can tell you that tonight. I can tell you that because I walked it out. I can tell you it because I've lived that. Perseverance. Your trial, you may say, I can't even understand what's happening in the midst of this trial. This is a mess. But God's working perseverance in you. The last thing about promotion, I don't want any of you to come up here for prayer and say, I just want to be the vice president. Be glad to let you have it. I don't have that authority to give it to you. Only Michael Nortoon has that authority to give it to somebody. But about promotion, I want to say this to you. Don't ever seek after promotion. Doesn't work. That's you getting ahead of God. I can tell you that every ministry assignment I've had, every position in the Open Bible I've had, it came looking for me. I didn't have to go looking for it. God's in the promotion business. So He knows when you're ready. He knows when the time is right. So don't become impatient with Him. Let's stand to our feet a little bit. We're going to sing this song. And I know this song. I love this song that we're going to sing. And if you're here and you want prayer for purpose or perseverance or prayer about promotion, I'd be willing to pray with you, and I know others would too. But let's respond.